Welcome to the How to Life podcast by LifeWorks, a modern day advice column for young adults.
where we answer your questions on how
To
life.
welcome back to the How to Life podcast with D and T. Wanted to start today with an honest check-in. It's been quite a week, I think, for both of us, just kind of doing a lot. And so energetically, a little low. But we're happy to be here and continue to have these conversations because we also think it's important to continue to show up no matter where you're at. And so, with that, I hand it off so you can tell us about what our question is today.
Thank you. Okay, so we got a submission, so thank you for that. It asks us, do you have any rituals that help you calm down and refocus? I have been struggling staying on task because my mind is very loud. I feel that. Definitely being part of the generation raised on the internet, being a little distracted at times is a lot easier for us than I think than most. Um, I guess when I think of this question, one of the most helpful practices in the last handful of years that has allowed me to refocus when I catch myself getting distracted is to do just a simple mindful breathing exercise. Because for me, it's a very quick technique to get back on track, which is helpful because part of the distraction can sometimes be feeling overwhelmed and having a lot on your plate and not having enough time to get everything done. So sometimes you can put yourself in a spiral by worrying about how to get on track and it taking long, and then you take longer to get back on track and you're just kind of stuck in this cycle of distraction. But one of the benefits of mindful breathing is it can take less than 3 minutes maybe to do it. And specifically, I'm talking about square breathing or mindful breathing. I remember first reading about this when I was in high school, and it being quoted by some Navy SEAL about its application in combat to kind of recenter and refocus. So, if you're dealing with any type of distraction that's less than the kind of stress that you would feel being in the middle of a battlefield, I think this can help you too. And it starts off by closing your eyes, taking a deep inhale for 4 seconds, holding that breath for another 4 seconds, exhaling for the next 4 seconds, and then before breathing back in, kind of holding that exhale for another 4 seconds before repeating the cycle as many times as you need. You can kind of feel your blood pressure lowering, your breathing kind of becoming more steady. I think it's a good physical rebalancing that can allow you to refocus and calm down and get back to your work. Yeah.
Is it called the square breathing technique because it's like inhale for 4 seconds, exhale or hold, then exhale, hold?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like a visual representation of to remember how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a helpful visual aid.
Cool.
Yeah, to help you along with that breathing exercise. I find that to be very helpful. I've used that for many years. Um, but there's a multitude of different approaches to kind of recentering and rebalancing. Are there any things that have been helping you or you've been using?
Yeah, I've put on a lot of different breathing and meditation types of recordings before. Usually, Spotify podcast is where I go. And that technique has come up a lot. And so I just didn't even know the name of it, square breathing technique. So I do notice that's used quite frequently. But to be completely honest, the holds don't really work for me. And maybe I'm just more of
Really?
an anxious person. I don't know. But it like freaks me out to hold my breath too long while I'm like feeling anxious. Like I just want to breathe deeply. So what actually works for me is to just put on a slower song or just something with a slower beat. And for me, I actually just have one track that I go back to for when I'm feeling anxious or overwhelmed or like my mind is racing. And it's the Trigger Protection Mantra by Janae Aiko. I just randomly, it was recommended to me on Spotify and I put it on, and it kind of, it's like a sound bath. There's just some crystal sounding bowls in the background, and it just sort of really calm reverberations. And not to be super woo woo or anything, it's just calming to me. I don't know what the sounds are, but it's really calming to me. And it's slow enough where I feel like I'm breathing in for 4 and breathing out for 4, and that works for me.
Mm.
And she's literally saying calm down. And usually I think that just focusing on something that's not your thoughts, just like a slow sound or a mantra like that, actually helps bring me to the present, to just ground. Because I think that's step one, just like reground. Like if your thoughts spiraling and just feeling like, oh my god, where am I, how do I just make this stop? And the first step is to just figure out a way to pause, recenter, come back to the present, this moment. It's not that serious.
I think that was great. Thank you. Yeah, I've heard you use the trigger protection mantra in times of need and seen firsthand how much it's helped you, and recognize in myself when you're playing it, it also is incredibly relaxing and calming. And yeah, I understand what you say when it's finding something that can just kind of allow your mind to focus on for that moment, to get outside of your mind and outside of your thoughts for just that little bit. And sometimes that can break that cycle of distraction and racing thoughts. So I think that's a great recommendation. Another one that I find really helps me is doing like a quick nature reset if that's possible. A lot of times I feel the situation we're describing is for folks that work in an office setting. So even though you might not be able to always find some nature, I prefer to be able to step outside and, you know, see some trees, some greenery. Um, so what I do is you know, I'm lucky enough to live in what I think is one of the best parts of the island. So I get to just look out my window and I kind of just um, embrace the image of the ko'olau, and kind of just look at how beautiful it is, whether it's sunny or rainy. Something that kind of helps me to think about when I'm looking at either the mountain or even just a tree is that these are natural phenomenon in our world that have been around for hundreds of millions of years. And when we think about the problems we're facing in our lives, it can feel so intense, because we think our lives are the center of the universe, but reminding ourselves that, you know, scientifically, trees have been around longer than a lot of other things on this planet, and these mountains have been here for so much longer, and they've endured and found a way. And in the same way that those natural phenomenon have found a way to persist and persevere, that we can too. That's something that I kind of keep in mind when enjoying some nature. Um, that can be helpful if you have potentially a view to look at something like that to help you refocus. But even if it's something as simple as standing in some sunlight, that actually has a lot of physiological benefits, and something that I would recommend if you're finding it hard to stay on task. Sometimes just physically separating yourself from your workspace can help break that, again, break that cycle of negative thoughts or distracting thoughts or just not being able to focus. And if you have the opportunity to stand in the sun, giving yourself at least 10 minutes to just breathe, soak it in, that gives you about just the minimum recommended amount of time to have your body produce some vitamin D, which is typically deficient in a lot of people who don't get enough sun, and is a big factor in increased anxiety, which can trigger or fuel your overthinking and your distracting thoughts. So, by making sure you get your daily recommended dose of vitamin D by standing in the sun for at least 10 minutes, I think that's something that we can easily implement to kind of help with these focus issues. So, yeah, quick nature reset is another one.
I love the way that you describe the almost instant physical humbling and literal reminder
Mm.
of endurance and nature and the resilience of nature. I think when I look at the mountains, it creates such a calming effect. It is almost like immediately humbling. I don't think I've ever fully articulated it in that way, and that makes a lot of sense. I love that reminder. And I also very much agree with the change of space, just how much of a difference that can change your mood and um, affect your overall well being. I think sometimes when we're enduring things or we're going through a lot, we're often sort of, without maybe intentionally even associating certain emotions with a space. For example, if you're experiencing a lot of stress at work or a lot of stress at home, when you're in that space, that's just kind of in your subconscious. And never underestimate even 10 minutes of removing yourself from that space and just taking a breath. And I think you'll be amazed that sometimes it just feels like the weight has all been lifted off your shoulders almost immediately. That happens for me a lot. And I appreciate that reminder. It sounds so simple and we say it so often, but I think many of us also still don't do it enough. I work in the downtown, and so the outside is not the most relaxing to me, but I think finding some space where you can just sit and breathe, even if it's just for a few minutes, that is self care. Um, and what self care should look like throughout your day, and checking in with yourself, and what prioritizing yourself looks like just in a day to day basis. And so I definitely agree with and appreciate those recommendations. I need those reminders all the time. I think another thing that helps me when my brain is racing is sometimes you just got to get it out. And so, brain dumping in the form of journaling, voice memoing, I think depending on how much time you have, kind of chooses your medium. But both of those help me significantly. Just the act of sort of expelling those thoughts is almost immediately relieving. And sometimes it feels a lot bigger in your head, and just getting it out on paper. I have voice memoed before and looked back at it and realized half of it just wasn't even English. And also sometimes it helps you realize that the problem actually isn't as big as you thought. And then by the end of it, you've kind of already answered your own question and you're now able to move on. Isn't that funny how that works sometimes? So sometimes it's literally the act of just getting out of your own head, like literally letting it out, get it out of your head. And that's step one. Either you're able to find clarity on next steps from there, or maybe you just resolve it talking to yourself, which happens to me half the time. That is probably one of the most effective things that I do for myself, besides regrounding, is kind of step one. Step two is then, okay, if it's still racing and it still feels like you've got a lot and you can't focus, you got to get it out, because it's just going to continue to pile up. And trying to suppress it almost never works. It just kind of continues to bubble up. It's like trying to push down like a floaty in a pool. It's just like, oh, why isn't it going down? Oh, let's release the air and let's just give ourselves a clean uh, slate to work off of.
I think that's a great recommendation. Thank you for sharing that. I personally, I have bad handwriting, so I don't journal. um, and if I was to journal digitally through my phone or my laptop, I think I would just end up distracting myself with some other avenue. But I also recognize that just as there are multiple intelligences, there are multiple preferences and best fit solutions for people's anxieties and racing thoughts. And so I encourage people to experiment and explore
Mm.
if, one or some of these recommendations or other recommendations you've tried don't happen to work for you. Don't give up. There's always some type of solution, or you can just try and find one yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be surprised the kind of solutions that you can find when you just put your mind to it. Another kind of in the moment solution that came to mind when I was reflecting on this question um, actually reminds me of something I heard as a tip for studying a long time ago by this inspiring guy that I had met who had been a troubled youth and he had struggled with school and can apply to work as well. And he said that, and he admitted that it sounded silly in a way, but for him to get himself to focus on reading through his textbook passages, he would place an M&M at the end of each paragraph and eat one as soon as he read through it. And as silly as that sounds, it makes a lot of sense when you think of classical conditioning, Pavlov's dogs,
Mm.
where it's just a simple positive reinforcement for a behavior. And if that's how we teach our children to do anything, um, it works. Sugar immediately activates the pleasure center in the brain in the same type of cycle that dopamine rewards in action to make you repeat it in the future.
Mm.
Um,
I love that you just said that. You said if we teach our kids this way and it's effective, it's like, why can't we do that for ourselves? Right? I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy for us, especially as we're, either in the early parts or mid or even later parts of careers and adulthood, we're all still trying to figure out how to life, obviously. And one thing to kind of give yourself grace and give yourself patience is to recognize that, we all still have that inner child within us, and how we speak and treat that inner child can have a huge impact on our day to day lives. I remember reading somewhere that it was like, I'm going to start treating myself, my inner child, as I would have wanted to be treated. So if I feel like I need to take a nap, I'll like, take a nap, buddy. You deserve it.
Mm.
Things like that can kind of give you a greater appreciation for the difficulty in facing your day-to-day challenges. So even if it's
Mm.
something as simple as positive reinforcement through candy to get you through each assignment, um, and just kind of having that framework set up can kind of shut out your thoughts because that's only what you need to focus on. You're just focusing on the next reward part. The counter example to that is also something that I heard, which is a classical conditioning, but in with negative reinforcement. Um, was I forget where I heard this, but it was putting a rubber band on your wrist, and every time you catch yourself kind of drifting off or getting distracted, you pull it a little bit and snap yourself on the wrist. Not extremely hard, um, but just a slight negative reinforcement like that can help people readjust. Sometimes something as simple as snapping yourself out of it physically
Mm.
can help snap yourself out of these distracting thoughts.
Not sure I would advocate for any harm, even if it's slight, because I just don't want people to kind of take that and run with it in a dangerous way. But I think that could also be interpreted that like, hey, I really want to go grab drinks with my friends tonight, or I really want to do this thing. But if I don't accomplish this, I don't get this, right? That is another, I think, form of negative reinforcement. And we don't really hold ourselves. Maybe we're a little too lenient sometimes. We're like, oh, well, I'll get it done later. I'm just going to go do this fun stuff now. But the short term joy ends up then compiling into this long term suffering. So I think both sides of it, of whatever is more effective for you, and maybe it's a combination of both. I think what we're ultimately concluding is that you need to find what works best for you, what resonates for you. And maybe that's taking a step back and thinking like what's effective or what values really are coming to play here, that I know, like, I love food, but I don't get to eat like my favorite snack until I finish this one task, which I'm almost done, and just sort of finding little ways to power through. And then maybe that turns into big picture solutions for yourself as well.
I think that was a great session of offering some recommendations in the moment that people can try out. Um, Something that I try to do when I'm struggling with something, especially unfortunately if what I tried didn't work, is try and do a autopsy is the wrong word, but a a post situation type of reflection to kind of find out what didn't work about that and maybe what something I can try out next. So in that, I try to just reflect on what I tried, or if I tried anything at all, try and reflect on what is causing me, what kind of thoughts, what I'm thinking about that's distracting me so much, trying to design an action plan for next time
Mm.
to address it when it comes up. Because if it came up and it didn't get resolved, it's very likely going to come up again.
Mm.
So being prepared for it, maybe just preparing for it next time sometimes can give you the subconscious support to not have those racing thoughts the next time you're facing that.
Mm.
We both talked about getting that the importance of getting some physical separation and some physical space. So sometimes that can be implemented after if you weren't particularly successful in something you tried that didn't involve getting yourself away from the place that's triggering these racing thoughts.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point, and the reflection piece and how you handle the aftermath really, or like once you get over that situation, it's so important to make that space for reflection, because now it's bringing up a question for me. What triggered the spiraling thoughts? Has it just been an ongoing thing? Maybe then finding some of these rituals to sort of help relieve that pressure in your mind throughout the day is the answer, or maybe it was a specific event. And if that's the case, okay, was it me being in a specific space that triggered me? Was it a specific event? And then kind of figuring out how to then set yourself up for success, like you're saying, in the future. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be in that kind of space because it makes me feel this certain way, or I'm not able to be productive in these types of spaces. Or, hey, you know what? I'm noticing this is coming up for me. Maybe the way that person talked to me like made my mind racing, and now I'm thinking about it. Okay, what can I take away from that situation for myself so that I'm better equipped next time? How can I learn and grow from that? Or how can I not put myself in those situations anymore? I think part of the reflection process that could be helpful is determining whether or not you could require some mental boundaries. And what I mean by that is I am definitely someone who's prone to overthinking and these thought spirals. And sometimes I've just had to look back and realize, man, I was making myself miserable and like stuck in this thought spiral for like 3 hours, didn't get anything done for 3 hours. And there was a point in which I just got sick of it. And I told myself, you know what? I am wearing myself sick right now. And I don't want to feel like this anymore. I have stuff to do. I need to get on with my day. And literally said, I'm going to come back to this thought later and just put a stop to it. And so much easier said than done. Again, when you're in that spiral, sometimes it's hard to sort of stop it. So, some of those short term rituals I think could really help you find a place of pause to be able to regather your thoughts. Um, but sometimes when your feelings are so high, I think it's also really helpful to keep in the back of your mind that, like, hey, I'm in control. Let me just take this out of my, my tool belt, and we're going to just put a pause on this for now. And while it's not a permanent solution, compartmentalization and remembering that tool for future could be so helpful for your energy. And sometimes that's all you need. And maybe it doesn't even come back after, because you're like, you know what? I gave that enough time and energy. And I was so miserable in those 3 hours that I was like making myself sick, worrying about something that turns out didn't even actually matter that much. Or turns out it resolved itself later. And that's it, And that has actually been really powerful for me when the feelings and emotions have been super high, because I just got to a point where like I'm exhausted. I actually cannot go on any further like this. So don't forget that you have that option, and maybe part of your regrounding practice is reminding yourself that you're in control. Maybe that's a mantra.
I think the last bit to address for this question are things that we can do to prepare ahead of time. So before the moment um, of getting, overwhelmed and distracted, letting the loud thoughts kind of just like, you know, blot out your ability to focus. Something that I find helpful is exercising. I prefer to exercise in the beginning of my day because for this very reason. I did notice throughout my academic career and professional career that um, a lot of times what's happening when you have racing thoughts and are getting distracted easily is just a simple excess of energy. You just have too much energy. And just like again, kind of harkening back to that example of treating your inner child with grace, is elementary school you have recess. You gotta let the kids play. You gotta let them get it out before you let them come back into the classroom to finish the rest of their day. And if you kind of think back on that experience when you were growing up, it is helpful. So, what you can do to make sure you don't have too much energy going into your day when it's important is to do things like exercise. I prefer to weight lift, but even things that just kind of get movement and get the blood flowing can be invigorating enough to you physically to kind of let go and exude out that extra energy so that when you start your day, you're not going into it with all this pent up energy that can translate into mental anxiety and cause these racing thoughts and easily distract you from what you need to get done.
To add to that, if morning workouts aren't your thing, I do still highly encourage a consistent morning routine. And that looks different for everybody, but I think something that is important to you, it could be as simple as affirmations, but I know for some friends, if you're religious, maybe listening to a Bible verse in the morning. I know that works for some of my clients. Little things and just taking a moment to stretch or have a cup of hot tea, have a good breakfast. Like, this is all part of your consistent morning routine that you are catering to your needs. And I'm going to continue to say the word consistent because that is the make it or break it here. That just having a morning routine when you feel like it is actually not contributing to your overall long-term success. It's actually when we're doing the things that are hard, even when we don't feel like it, that we are building that habit for ourselves and we're building that more solid baseline for ourselves. For me, my morning routine is trying to get some movement, and maybe some days I'm so tired it's just a stretch, but just waking up my body, and then listening to a morning affirmations playlist, which I have been putting together for years now, and some of those songs have been there for years now and they don't get old. And some days I'm able to really get into it and get into my music, and some days I am just, it's kind of in one ear and out the other. But for me it's still worth it because I know maybe my subconscious, at the very least, if I'm kind of just not with it, is hearing these positive thoughts and hearing these positive phrases that I can take with me throughout my day. And that, again, keeping sort of the focus on the long term success and well-being is really, really important.
I love that you went into the morning routines and the morning affirmations, having a routine. And we're not talking about those weird videos about how do people have like an hour and a half morning routine where they like steam their sheets and all this crazy stuff. That's not realistic. I think who we're talking
I
about
haven't
are
seen that.
normal people. Oh, yeah, that's like a whole thing. Is it immediately makes you question, wait, how are you working at all? You know? Um
Steaming their shit. I don't even do that on the regular when I do have time.
Yeah, yeah, it's a bit unhinged, um, but that's not to take away from the benefit and the value of having a routine as small as a little morning ritual. For a lot of people I know, one of my friends, she's an entrepreneur, and one of her things that she shared was she loves making her morning latte, her morning coffee. She has like a sophisticated coffee machine and she brews it. That's how she likes to start her day. Just having that step by step routine where you're just going to check off the boxes, just getting, first of all, getting things done in the start of your day can kind of set you up for I'm accomplishing things, I'm ready to do them. Sometimes that feeling of competence will translate to alleviating your anxieties about whether you're able to do the things that you're needing to do that day, which might be contributing to your racing thoughts and your distractibility. And so by having something every day that you accomplish through your morning ritual or your morning routine makes you feel ready for the day in that sense.
Like making your
like
bed.
making your bed.
That's also part of my morning routine that I forgot to mention, but it's so routine that I forgot that I even do it. It's just something I wake up immediately and do. And the whole idea behind that, right, is exactly what you were saying, is that
Hmm.
that is if everything were to not go my way today, at the very least, I made my bed. That is one thing I already started my day with accomplishing.
Agreed. And
Mm.
it's so funny that you mentioned the bed making thing because that's also kind of like a meme on the internet where it's like, just make your bed. You'll solve all your problems if you just make your bed in the morning. We're not saying it'll solve all your problems, but it definitely can help because it definitely doesn't feel good as like a visual reminder as you start your day that like I'm not even capable of making my bed, which it's not a
My
huge
life's a
reflection
mess. My
on
bed's a
my
mess.
bed's a mess, my life's a mess. You know, it shouldn't
Right.
reflect on who you are as a person. It shouldn't attack your identity. It is just a bed at the end of the day. But it is something simple that you can do. So it's a first starting step if you're finding it hard to even think about what kind of morning ritual, morning routine. Sometimes that can be just enough to get you on the right track. If you have any morning rituals, morning routines, or rituals and techniques that help you refocus when your kind of thoughts are racing, please feel free to share them with us, and we'd love to hear them. And thank you again for this question. We hope that our uh, session of discussion was helpful for you, and you found some little tidbit of knowledge that will help you tackle that problem the next time it comes up. So, mahalo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Visit the links in our bio to submit your questions on how to life
Or book a coaching session with us.